My name is Dr. Leah Petrova, and for most of my 34 years, I have existed in the quiet, dusty corners of my family's perception. While they celebrated my brother Isaac's flashy career as a high-flying art dealer, a man who could sell sand in a desert, they saw me as the bookish cousin who played with old paintings. My life's work, the meticulous, scientific art of restoration, was a quaint hobby in their eyes. But I never expected that my quiet little hobby would give me the power to orchestrate the most spectacular, career-ending scandal the art world had seen in a generation, and that the architect of my family's pride, my own brother, would be at the very center of the inferno. His greatest triumph was built on a brilliant, beautiful lie, and as the bids at the world's most prestigious auction house climbed into the stratosphere, I stood in the shadows, holding the single, undeniable truth that would burn his glittering world to the ground. Before I dive into how a single fleck of paint 1/1000th of a millimeter wide became my weapon of choice, I'd love to know where you're all watching from today. Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever felt underestimated or had your passion dismissed by the people who were supposed to support you the most, please hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. And for all the new viewers here, make sure you subscribe, because this is a community for people who understand that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who holds all the power. My family operated on a very simple, unspoken principle: volume equaled value. Isaac was loud. His laughter boomed across holiday dinner tables. His successes were announced like royal decrees, and his personality filled every room, sucking the air out for anyone else. I was quiet. My successes were microscopic, literally. I could spend a week celebrating the successful removal of a single square inch of discolored varnish from a 17th century canvas, a victory legible only to me and a handful of experts in the world. To my family, this was akin to celebrating a neatly organized spice rack. It was nice, but it wasn't the stuff of legends. Isaac was their legend. From childhood, the dynamic was set in stone. I remember one Christmas when I was 10. Isaac, who was 12, had won his school's public speaking competition. My father had the trophy, a gaudy gold-plated cup, placed in the center of the mantelpiece. For weeks, every guest who entered our home was given a full, blow-by-blow account of Isaac's rhetorical genius. That same month, a small, detailed drawing I had done of a bird's nest had won a regional youth art prize. My prize was a gift certificate to a local art supply store and a small, printed certificate. When I showed it to my mother, she patted my head. "Oh, that's lovely, dear," she had said, her eyes already drifting back towards the mantelpiece. "Isaac's trophy is just so handsome, isn't it?" The certificate was never framed. It ended up in a box of old report cards in the attic, another quiet accomplishment buried under the weight of Isaac's noise. This pattern didn't fade with time, it calcified. When Isaac got into a prestigious business school, my parents threw a party that spilled out onto the lawn, the sound of their pride echoing through the neighborhood. When I was accepted into the Courtauld Institute of Art for my master's in conservation, a program with a single-digit acceptance rate, my father nodded slowly over his newspaper. "London, huh? That'll be an expensive hobby, Leah. Make sure you don't get distracted from finding a good husband." The implication was clear. Isaac's path was an investment in the family's future, a future of wealth and influence. My path was a flight of fancy, a girlish whim that I would hopefully outgrow. I didn't argue. I just packed my bags and went, finding solace in the hushed libraries and sterile laboratories where my passion wasn't a hobby, but a science. My mentor at the Courtauld, a formidable woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, saw something in me my family never did. She saw patience not as passivity, but as a tool. She saw my quiet nature not as a lack of confidence, but as a capacity for deep, unbroken focus. "They think you're just cleaning paintings, Leah," she told me once, her sharp eyes peering at me over her spectacles. "They don't understand you are a time traveler. You're having a conversation with the artist across centuries. It takes a very specific, very powerful kind of person to listen." Her words were a balm, a quiet validation that I clung to when the weekly phone calls home inevitably turned into a monologue about Isaac's latest triumph, a big sale, a fancy party, a new expensive car. My own muse, like the publication of my first peer-reviewed paper on pigment degradation, was met with a polite, "That's nice, sweetie. Did Isaac tell you he's vacationing in Monaco?" So when the call came from Isaac 2 months ago, I was not surprised by the tone. It was his usual blend of forced familiarity and casual condescension. "Leah, little mouse. How are things in the workshop?" He began, the word workshop dripping with the same dismissive pity as hobby. I was in my state-of-the-art conservation lab, a facility I had built myself with grants and years of relentless work, a place filled with equipment worth more than his sports car. "It's a laboratory, Isaac. And things are fine," I said, my voice even. I had learned long ago that reacting to his barbs only fueled him. He chuckled, a sound like gravel rolling downhill. Right, the lab. "Listen, I need a favor. A big one. It's for the family, really." Everything with Isaac was for the family when he needed something. "I've done it, Leah. I found the one. The big one. A lost Jean-Marc Belanger. The Veiled Countess. Hasn't been seen in 200 years. It's going to be the centerpiece of the spring auction at Sotheby's. We're talking record-breaking numbers. This puts the Petrova name in the history books." He was breathless with his own brilliance. Jean-Marc Belanger was a fictional master of the Rococo period, a contemporary of Fragonard, whose work was exceedingly rare. Finding a lost original would indeed be the discovery of a lifetime. "That's incredible, Isaac," I said, a genuine flicker of excitement stirring in me. "What do you need from me?" "It just needs a light touch," he said breezily. "A surface clean. Maybe touch up a bit of the craquelure. You know, your magic. I need it to look absolutely pristine for the viewing. I'll have it couriered to you tomorrow. Top priority, okay?" "I'm counting on you." The phrase hung in the air, heavy and insincere. He wasn't counting on my expertise. He was counting on my obedience. He saw me as a glorified cleaning service, a final step in his triumphant march to glory. "Isaac," I started, ready to explain that a light touch on a potential 18th century masterpiece was a multi-week process involving painstaking analysis before a single solvent ever touched the canvas. He cut me off. "Great. Knew you'd be a team player. We'll all be rich and famous after this, little mouse. You can buy all the tiny brushes your heart desires." He hung up before I could say another word. I stood in the silent, controlled air of my lab, the hum of the climate control system a steady counterpoint to the buzzing in my head. He had no idea what he was asking. He had no idea what I did. He just saw a dusty old painting and his quiet cousin who could make it shiny. But as the painting arrived the next day, nestled in a climate-controlled crate like a sleeping princess, I felt a familiar thrill. The family drama faded away, replaced by the pure academic curiosity of the puzzle before me. This was my world. And in my world, I was not the little mouse. I was the master. The crate opened with a soft hiss of decompressing air, revealing the painting. My breath caught in my throat. It was exquisite. A woman, her face partially obscured by a delicate lace veil, stared out with an expression of melancholic intelligence. The brushwork was fluid and confident, the colors luminous even under a faint layer of grime. It had all the hallmarks of a Belanger. The soft, romantic lighting, the intricate detail on the fabric, the psychological depth in the sitter's eyes. Isaac, for all his bluster, might have actually done it. He might have found a ghost. I spent the first 2 days just looking. I documented its condition with high-resolution photography under normal, raking, and ultraviolet light. The UV light revealed several small, dark patches of old retouching from a past restoration attempt, but nothing alarming. The canvas was backed by a secondary canvas, a common practice to support a fragile original. The wooden stretcher bars looked appropriately aged, dark and hand-hewn. Everything on the surface appeared consistent with an 18th century origin. My initial excitement began to solidify into a professional respect for Isaac's find. Maybe this time, his boasting was justified. My process is methodical, almost ritualistic. I began with the cleaning tests, applying tiny swabs of carefully calibrated solvent mixtures to the painting's extreme edges to see how the varnish and paint layers would react. It's a delicate dance, finding a solvent that will remove the yellowed, brittle varnish without touching the artist's original paint. After several tests, I found the right balance and began the real work. Inch by inch, square by square, I worked my way across the canvas. It was meditative. The scent of mineral spirits and dammer varnish filled the air. Under my Q-tip, the grime of centuries dissolved, revealing the true, vibrant colors beneath. The deep blues of the Countess's gown, the pearlescent pink of her skin. It was like watching a flower bloom in fast motion. I was 3 days into this process, working on the lower right corner, an area of deep shadow, when I saw it. It was a microscopic inconsistency, something a casual observer, even an experienced dealer like Isaac, would never notice. The craquelure, the fine network of cracks that forms as paint ages, was just a little too perfect, a little too uniform. Genuine age craquelure is chaotic, following the specific stresses on the canvas and the varying drying times of different pigments. This looked manufactured. It was a tiny, dissonant note in an otherwise perfect symphony. A faint prickle of unease started at the base of my neck. I told myself to dismiss it. It could be anything. An unusual primer layer, a specific atmospheric condition where it was stored for a century. There were 1,000 rational explanations. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It was like a splinter in my mind. I moved from my magnifying glass to my digital microscope, focusing on that same small area. Under 200x magnification, the landscape of the paint changed. I could see the individual particles of pigment, suspended in the dried oil binder. And that's when I felt the first real jolt of adrenaline, cold and sharp. In the deep shadow, mixed in with what should have been bone black or Van Dyke brown, I saw a tiny, intensely colored particle of green. It was a brilliant, almost electric shade of emerald. It shouldn't have been there. There was no green in the composition in that area. It could have been a stray fiber, a contamination from my own lab. I meticulously cleaned the area and looked again. It was still there, embedded deep within the paint layer, under the craquelure. My heart started to beat a little faster. There are many greens in the historical palette. Verdigris, green earth, malachite. But this particular shade had a synthetic, modern intensity to it. I knew I couldn't be sure without a proper analysis. Trying to calm my racing thoughts, I told myself I was being paranoid. This was Isaac's big moment. It was my family's moment. I was probably projecting my own complicated feelings onto the canvas. I decided to take a sample. It was a terrifying prospect. To do it, I would have to use a sterile microscalpel to extract a sample barely the size of a pinhead, ensuring I went through all the layers from the varnish down to the primer. It was an invasive act, a violation of the artwork, and only justified under the most extreme suspicion. My hand trembled slightly as I positioned the scalpel under the microscope. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and extracted the sample. I placed the microscopic particle onto a slide and carried it over to the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, a machine that could identify the precise chemical composition of a substance. The process took about an hour. An hour where I paced my lab, unable to sit still, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The machine hummed, processing the data. Finally, a graph appeared on my monitor, a series of peaks and valleys representing the different compounds it had detected. I saw the expected results for oil binder, for lead white, for the earth pigments. And then I saw it. A sharp, undeniable peak that had no business being there. The computer matched it to a compound in its library. My blood ran cold. The chemical signature was unmistakable. Phthalocyanine green. A synthetic pigment, a brilliant and stable green, prized by modern artists for its intensity. A pigment that was first synthesized in a laboratory in 1927, 150 years after Jean-Marc Bélanger was dead and buried. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. The humming of the servers in the corner of the room seemed to grow impossibly loud. Phthalocyanine green. It wasn't a contamination. It wasn't from an old restoration. The sample I took was from a layer of paint that should have been original, a layer sealed under what appeared to be age-appropriate varnish and craquelure. It was a fatal, anachronistic fingerprint. The painting was a fake. A forgery. And not just any forgery. A breathtakingly brilliant one. The forger had been a master, someone who had studied Bélanger's technique, his brushstrokes, his soul. They had used period-appropriate canvas, or a very convincing replica. They had aged the stretcher bars, cooked the varnish to yellow it perfectly, and even induced a believable crackler. They had done everything right except for one tiny microscopic slip-up. They had, perhaps for just one brushstroke in a dark corner, used a pigment that didn't yet exist. Maybe their supply of 18th century replica green had run out. Maybe it was a moment of carelessness or even arrogance. It didn't matter why. The evidence was there, as clear and damning as a signature on a confession. The veiled countess was a lie. Isaac's masterpiece, the key to his fortune and fame, the crowning achievement of the Petrova name, was utterly, completely worthless. My first reaction was not anger or vindication. It was a profound, sinking sadness. The beautiful woman on the canvas seemed to mock me now, her melancholic smile and knowing smirk. My second reaction was a wave of nausea. Isaac was about to stake his entire professional reputation, not to mention millions of dollars of someone else's money on this painting. This wasn't just an embarrassment. It was a career-ending, potentially criminal act of fraud. I had to be sure. One anomalous pigment particle could, in theory, be explained away, however unlikely. I needed more. I needed irrefutable proof. That's when I turned to the next tool in my arsenal: infrared reflectography. An infrared camera can see through the top layers of paint to reveal what lies beneath, specifically the underdrawing, the initial sketch the artist lays down on the canvas. Every artist has a unique handwriting in their sketches, the way they lay down lines, the type of cross-hatching they use to indicate shadow, the confidence of their strokes. Belanger's few known underdrawings, which I had studied extensively, were characterized by loose, fluid charcoal lines and soft, smudged shading. I set up the camera and began scanning the canvas, the image appearing in ghostly black and white on my monitor. The underdrawing of the veiled countess began to emerge from beneath the paint. It was, like the painting itself, a work of art. The lines were precise, the anatomy perfect. But it wasn't Belanger. The shading wasn't soft and smudged. It was a tight, controlled, almost mechanical series of cross-hatched lines. It was a style I recognized instantly. My heart hammered against my ribs. I ran to my personal research archive, a digital database I had been compiling for over a decade. I typed in a name, Émile Dubois. Dubois was a shadowy figure, a French art student of immense talent who had dropped out of the École des Beaux-Arts in the 1920s and vanished, only to be rumored as the hand behind some of the most convincing forgeries of the 20th century. He was never caught, and his work was the stuff of legend among conservators. Technically perfect, but with subtle tells. His preferred period was the Rococo. His signature, visible only in the underdrawings of his confirmed forgeries, was his meticulous, engraver-like cross-hatching. I pulled up a file containing the infrared scans of a known Dubois forgery of a Fragonard. I placed it side by side with the scan of the veiled countess on my monitor. They were identical. The same tight hatching. The same precise, controlled lines. The same hand. It was a signature, as clear as if he had signed his own name on the front. This was it. The definitive, undeniable proof. The anachronistic pigment and the forger's signature underdrawing. The veiled countess was not a lost Belanger. It was a found Dubois. I sank into my chair, the weight of the discovery pressing down on me. My duty as a conservator was clear. I had to report this. The truth of the object is paramount. But this wasn't just any object. This was Isaac's object. This was my family's ticket to what they considered immortality. What was I supposed to do? I thought about calling Isaac immediately. I pictured his reaction. First, disbelief. Then, accusations. He would say I had messed up the tests. He would say I was incompetent. Then, when he couldn't deny the evidence, he would turn on me. He would accuse me of jealousy, of trying to sabotage him. He would find a way to bury the evidence, to get a second opinion from some less scrupulous expert who would give him the answer he wanted. The painting would be sold, the lie would be cemented into art history, and some unsuspecting collector would be out millions of dollars. The thought made me feel ill. I needed advice. I needed to talk to someone who understood the gravity of the situation, someone outside the toxic bubble of my family. I called the one person I knew I could trust, Dr. Anya Sharma. I explained the situation to her, carefully omitting Isaac's name, referring to him only as the dealer. I laid out the evidence, the phthalocyanine green, the Du Bois underdrawing. She listened patiently, without interruption. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. Well, she finally said, her voice dry. It seems your dealer has a very expensive and very beautiful problem. What do I do, Anya? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The auction is in 3 weeks. Your professional obligation is to the truth, Leah. You know this, she said gently. The integrity of the historical record of the market depends on it. This is why we have ethics. This is why our profession exists. It's not just about cleaning things. It's about protecting things. And the most important thing we protect is the truth. He won't listen to me, I confessed. He'll say I'm trying to ruin him. Then you don't give him the chance to bury it, she said, her voice firming. You are not just a restorer, Dr. Petrova. You are a scientist. You have data. You must compile this data into a formal report. Make it irrefutable. Every scan, every chromatograph, every historical precedent. Build a case so solid that no one can argue with it. Not the dealer, and not the auction house. She paused, then added, the truth has no agenda, Leah. It simply is. Your job is to present it. How others react to it is their burden, not yours. Her words cut through my panic, giving me a sense of clarity and purpose. She was right. This wasn't a family drama. This was a matter of professional ethics. My loyalty wasn't to Isaac's ambition. It was to the discipline to which I had dedicated my life. I spent the next week in a state of feverish, focused activity. I wrote the report. It was 30 pages long, dense with scientific data and art historical analysis. I included high-resolution images of the pigment particle, the mass spectrometry charts, the side-by-side comparisons of the underdrawings. I wrote it in the dry, dispassionate language of a scientific paper. It was cold, factual, and utterly damning. I printed and professionally bound 3 copies. One for me, one for my lawyer, and one for Sotheby's. A week before the auction, Isaac called. He was in an exceptionally good mood. Little mouse. The catalog is out. You should see the write-up they gave the Countess. They're calling it the most significant Rococo discovery of the century. The pre-sale estimate is $10 million, but my gut says it'll go for double that. You're going to be famous. Isaac, I said, my hand tightening on the bound copy of the report sitting on my desk. We need to talk about the painting. Talk away, he boomed. Tell me how pretty she looks now that you've worked your magic. It's not that, I said, trying to find the right words. My analysis turned up some inconsistencies. Some things that I think you need to see before the sale. There was a sudden, sharp silence on the other end. His jovial tone vanished, replaced by a cold, hard edge. What kind of inconsistencies? I'd rather show you the full report, I said. It's technical. No, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Tell me now, Leah. What did you find? I hesitated. This was my chance to tell him, to give him an out. But Anya's words echoed in my head. He would bury it. I found evidence that suggests the painting is not from the 18th century, I said, my voice steady. The explosion was immediate. Are you out of your mind? Is this a joke? After all I've done for you, giving you this opportunity, you're trying to sabotage me. You're jealous. You've always been jealous of my success while you're hiding in your dusty little lab playing with chemicals. The accusations were so predictable, so precisely what I had expected, that they didn't even sting. They just confirmed my path. It's not about jealousy, Isaac, I said calmly. It's about the scientific evidence. The pigments are wrong. The underdrawing is wrong. I don't want to hear it, he snarled. Your science is wrong. You made a mistake. You're probably cross-contaminating your samples or something. I have 3 independent experts who have authenticated the provenance. It's rock solid. This is happening, Leah. Don't you dare try to interfere. He hung up with a crash. I sat there, the dead phone in my hand, and felt a strange sense of peace. He had made the decision for me. He had refused the truth. Now, he would have to face the consequences. The night of the pre-auction celebratory dinner was the final nail in the coffin of my indecision. Isaac had booked a private room at one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. The entire family was there. Our parents, aunts, uncles, cousins. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and self-congratulation. Isaac was holding court at the head of the table, his face flushed with champagne and triumph. My father stood to give a toast. "To my son, Isaac," he declared, his voice thick with emotion. "A man with a golden eye and a will of iron. He is putting the Petrova name on the map, where it belongs. We are all so proud of you, son." The family erupted in applause. My mother was weeping quiet tears of joy. I sat there, swirling the wine in my glass, feeling like a ghost at the feast. Throughout the dinner, the conversation revolved around Isaac. The money, the fame, the celebrity collectors who were flying in for the auction. My contributions were, as always, an afterthought. My Aunt Carol leaned over to me at one point, patting my hand condescendingly. "It must be so exciting for you, Leah, to be a small part of all this. Did you enjoy cleaning the painting for your brother?" I looked her in the eye. "I did more than clean it, Aunt Carol. I analyzed it. My work was to verify its authenticity." My father overheard. He chuckled. "Leah, please. Let's not bore everyone with the technical details. We're celebrating tonight. The business side of things is what matters. Leave that to your brother. He's the expert in what sells." Isaac, overhearing this, shot me a triumphant smirk from across the table. It was a look that said, "See? This is the real world. Your little world of facts and figures doesn't matter here." In that moment, any lingering shred of familial duty I felt evaporated. They weren't just dismissing me. They were dismissing the truth. They were willfully choosing to live in Isaac's lucrative fantasy. And they had made me the silent, complicit accomplice. I smiled back at Isaac, a small, tight smile he wouldn't understand. A smile that said, "You are right. Your world is about to collide with mine. And my world has evidence." I made my decision. I would not confront him again. I would not warn the family. I had tried. They had made their choice. I would let them have their glorious moment. I would let the bidding climb. I would let them taste the victory, feel the exhilaration of the millions. And then, at the very peak of their triumph, I would present my report. I would not do it with anger or malice. I would do it with the cold, quiet precision of a scientist presenting her findings. I would let the truth do the work. The scandal would not be my creation. It would be his. The night of the auction was a spectacle. The main sale room at Sotheby's was a theater of wealth, power, and desire. The walls were hung with masterpieces, each one waiting its turn in the spotlight. The air hummed with a dozen languages, the quiet murmur of the art world's elite. I saw famous actors, reclusive billionaires, and the directors of major museums, all gathered for the main event, the sale of The Veiled Countess. Isaac was in his element. He moved through the room like a shark, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, his face alight with a predatory glee. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than my first microscope. Our parents were with him, practically glowing with pride, basking in the reflected glory of their son. They saw me standing near the back of the room, by the long desk where the auction house officials sat, and my mother gave me a tight, almost warning-like smile, as if to say, "Behave yourself. Don't ruin this." I just gave a slight nod, my expression unreadable. In my leather portfolio, I clutched the bound report. It felt cool and heavy, a solid anchor of fact in a sea of speculation and hype. I found a spot to stand where I had a clear view of the auctioneer's podium, the bidding boards, and the desk of Mr. Alastair Finch, the senior vice president and head of Old Master Paintings. He was a man with a fearsome reputation for academic rigor and a notoriously low tolerance for nonsense. He was my target. The auction began. A Monet sold for 40 million. A Giacometti sculpture for 65. The numbers were dizzying, almost meaningless. I watched the proceedings with a strange detachment, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. I was not nervous. I was waiting. My entire life, I had been the one waiting in the wings while Isaac took center stage. Tonight would be no different, but the finale would be one none of them expected. Finally, it was time. Lot 37. The lights in the room dimmed slightly, and a single, brilliant spotlight illuminated the veiled countess on its velvet-draped easel. The room fell silent. The painting truly was a masterpiece of deception. Under the theatrical lighting, she looked magnificent, her enigmatic smile seeming to promise centuries of secrets. The auctioneer, a man with a smooth, hypnotic voice, began his speech. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment we have all been waiting for. A treasure lost to time, a ghost of the Rococo, returned to us. The magnificent veiled countess by the master Jean-Marc Bélanger. A discovery that has rewritten a chapter of art history. A painting of sublime beauty and impeccable provenance. I almost smiled. Impeccable. He laid out the fake history, a carefully constructed narrative of aristocratic French families and secret inheritances that Isaac had no doubt paid a pretty penny to fabricate. We will open the bidding at $8 million, the auctioneer declared. A hand went up immediately. $8 million, he acknowledged. And then it began. The bids came fast, like gunfire. $9 million on the phone. $10 million in the room. I have $10 million. Do I hear 11? The numbers on the electronic board flashed, climbing higher and higher. Isaac sat in the front row, a triumphant king on his throne. He wasn't even watching the board anymore. He was watching the room, soaking in the envy and awe of his peers. He caught my eye once more and gave a subtle, confident nod, as if granting me permission to be impressed. I remained perfectly still. The price climbed past 15 million, then 18. Two determined bidders, one on the phone and one in the room, were locked in a duel. $19 million on the phone. Do I hear 20? The bidder in the room, a stern-looking woman in diamonds, raised her paddle. 20 million. The room broke into a spontaneous round of applause. Isaac's grin was so wide it looked painful. My father put a proud hand on his shoulder. My mother dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. They were at the summit of their world. The phone bidder came back. 21 million. The woman in the room hesitated, then shook her head. The bidding stalled. The auctioneer began his final chant. $21 million. A historic price for a historic painting. Sold to the bidder on the phone. Going once. My moment had come. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I pushed off the wall and began to walk. I did not hurry. My heels made no sound on the thick carpet. The world seemed to slow down. The auctioneer's voice faded into a distant hum. My focus was entirely on the man at the end of the desk, Alistair Finch. He was watching the podium, a small, satisfied smile on his face. I reached his side just as the auctioneer said, "Going twice." I leaned in slightly and spoke, my voice low but clear, cutting through his reverie. "Mr. Finch, my apologies for the interruption." He turned, his expression one of polite annoyance. "Can I help you?" "My name is Dr. Leah Petrova," I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I am the conservator who restored the veiled countess for this auction." His eyes flickered with recognition. "Ah yes, Dr. Petrova. A magnificent job." "Thank you," I said. However, during my scientific analysis of the work, I discovered conclusive evidence that it is a 20th century forgery. You need to see this report before that gavel falls. I placed the heavy-bound dossier on the desk in front of him. I opened it to the first page, the summary of findings with the words phthalocyanine green, synthesized 1927, and underdrawing consistent with Émile Dubois, active circa 1920 to 1940, in bold. The change in him was instantaneous. The polite annoyance evaporated, replaced by a wave of shock so profound it was like a physical blow. The color drained from his face. His eyes, wide with horror, darted from the report to the painting, then back to my face. He saw no hysteria in my expression, only calm, scientific certainty. He knew. In that instant, he knew I was telling the truth. For all sales at $21 million. The auctioneer's voice boomed, oblivious. Finch's hand shot up, not a paddle, but a sharp, commanding gesture to an assistant standing near the podium. The assistant whispered urgently to the auctioneer. The auctioneer faltered mid-word. "For one moment, ladies and gentlemen. We will just pause the bidding on lot 37. A confused, uncertain murmur rippled through the crowd. What was happening? A pause at the climax of the night's biggest sale was unheard of. I saw Isaac stand up, his face a mask of confusion. He looked at the podium, then at Finch's desk. And then he saw me, standing there calmly, and the dossier in Finch's hands. The confusion on his face curdled into a dawning, sickening understanding, followed by a flash of pure, unadulterated fury. The king had just seen the guillotine being wheeled onto the stage. Finch, acting with the swift, cold efficiency of a man trying to contain a biohazard, stood up. Dr. Petrova with me. Isaac, a word. He gestured towards a discreet door behind the official's desk. Isaac, his face pale and blotchy with rage, strode towards us. The whispers in the main room grew louder as the three of us disappeared into a small, soundproofed office. The moment the door clicked shut, Isaac's composure shattered. "What the hell is this, Leah?" he hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "Are you insane? You're doing this in the middle of the auction? You are trying to destroy me." "I tried to tell you," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. I felt strangely detached, like a scientist observing a chemical reaction. "You wouldn't listen. The painting is a forgery." "It is not a forgery," he roared, jabbing a finger at me. "My experts authenticated it. You and your little chemistry set are wrong. You've always been jealous, a bitter little nobody hiding in the shadows." Alistair Finch, who had been silently observing, stepped between us. His earlier shock had been replaced by an icy, professional calm that was far more terrifying than Isaac's rage. He held up the report. "Isaac," he said, his voice quiet and laden with menace. "Is this true? Did Dr. Petrova present these findings to you before the auction?" Isaac opened his mouth, then closed it. The lie died on his lips. He knew Finch would find out. She mentioned some concerns," he stammered, "but I thought she was mistaken. It's a professional disagreement." "A professional disagreement?" Finch's voice was dangerously soft. "Dr. Petrova has provided mass spectrometry data and infrared reflectography scans. This isn't a disagreement about brushstrokes, Isaac. This is chemistry. This is physics. Phthalocyanine green. The hand of Émile Dubois. Are you telling me that you, one of our most trusted dealers, were not aware of this?" Finch didn't need an answer. He knew. Whether Isaac had known it was a fake from the beginning, or had been willfully blind to any evidence that contradicted his ambition, it didn't matter. The result was the same fraud. "The sale of Lot 37 is suspended indefinitely," Finch stated, his words like chips of ice. "Sotheby's legal department will be in contact with you and your experts first thing in the morning. We will be conducting our own independent analysis, but frankly," he gestured to my report, "this looks quite conclusive. You have brought a monumental embarrassment upon this house, Isaac, and potentially a criminal liability." Isaac stared at him, speechless. The fight went out of him, replaced by a clammy, gray dread. He finally understood. It was over. He turned to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and pathetic pleading. "Leah, why?" "Because it's the truth, Isaac," I said simply. "That's all." The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The art world is a small, gossipy village, and news of the suspended auction spread like wildfire. By the next morning, it was a headline in the art section of the New York Times: "Sotheby's halts record-breaking sale amid forgery allegations." My name was mentioned as the conservator who raised the alarm. The story framed me as a hero of artistic integrity. My phone began to ring off the hook, but not with the calls I was dreading. It was museum curators, gallery owners, fellow conservators. They weren't calling to condemn me. They were calling to congratulate me on my courage and my ethics. "You did what we all hoped we'd have the guts to do," one told me. "You chose truth over money." The call from my parents came around noon. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message, my hands steady. It was my mother, her voice a hysterical shriek. "How could you? How could you do this to your own brother? To your family? After everything we've done for you? You have ruined us. You've destroyed the Petrova name forever." Then my father's voice, cold and final. "You have made your choice, Leah. Do not call us. Do not come here. You are no longer a part of this family." I listened to the message, and I felt a pang of sadness, a deep aching grief for the family I wished I had. But I did not feel regret. I deleted the message. It hurt, but it was a clean wound. A necessary amputation. Isaac's professional life disintegrated within a week. Sotheby's confirmed my findings, their own experts corroborating every detail. They severed all ties with him and initiated legal proceedings to recover the massive costs of the failed auction. The buyer, a reclusive tech billionaire, threatened to sue Isaac for fraud. The experts who had authenticated the painting backpedaled furiously, claiming they had only given a preliminary opinion. Isaac was a pariah. His name, the one he had been so desperate to see in the history books, was now a synonym for scandal and disgrace. A few days later, a beautiful bouquet of white orchids arrived at my lab. The card was from Anya Sharma. It said only, "Integrity is a rare pigment. I am proud of you." I placed the orchids on my workbench, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I cried. Not tears of sadness or anger, but of relief. The weight I had been carrying for years, the weight of my family's expectations, of my own perceived inadequacy, was finally gone. I was free. A year passed. The storm of the scandal faded, leaving behind a new landscape. My life had changed in ways I never could have predicted. My small, private conservation firm was now one of the most sought after in the world. I was no longer the little mouse in the workshop. I was Dr. Leah Petrova, the woman who brought down the veiled countess, a name now synonymous with unwavering integrity. I was turning down commissions from major museums simply because I didn't have the time. My lab, once my quiet sanctuary, was now a bustling place of research and work. With 2 interns, I was mentoring myself. I had found my own family, a chosen family of colleagues, mentors, and clients who respected me not in spite of my quiet nature, but because of it. They valued my precision, my focus, my refusal to compromise on the truth. One afternoon, while I was carefully removing a layer of 19th century overpaint from a genuine Titian, an email popped up on my computer. The subject line was just my name, Leah. The sender was Isaac. I hadn't heard from him or my parents in a year. My hand hovered over the delete button, but a flicker of curiosity made me open it. The email was short, stripped of his usual bluster. He wrote that he had settled the lawsuits, that he was broke, and that he was now working as a consultant for a small regional auction house in the Midwest, a universe away from Sotheby's. He was a ghost in the art world. Then he wrote the line that made me sit back in my chair. I had a piece come through the other day. A small Dutch landscape. I thought it was real, but I kept thinking about what you said about the craquelure. I looked at it under a microscope like you would. I saw it was fake. I should have listened to the expert. You were right about the painting. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness. There was no, "I'm sorry for how I treated you my entire life." It was a grudging, self-pitying admission, born not of remorse, but of his own ruin. It was the first time in our lives he had ever admitted I was better at something than he was. It was a pathetic, hollow victory, but a victory nonetheless. He had finally acknowledged my world, not because he respected it, but because it had destroyed his. I read the email once more, then I moved my cursor and clicked delete. I felt nothing. His validation, the thing I had craved for so long, meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. I had found my own. My greatest restoration wasn't the veiled countess. It was me. For years, I had been covered in layers of grime and yellowed varnish applied by my family's expectations and my own self-doubt. I had let them define me by their standards, by their volume. The scandal wasn't my revenge. It was my liberation. It was the solvent that stripped away the false layers and revealed what was underneath. A person whose worth wasn't determined by applause or auction prices, but by her commitment to her principles. My work is quiet. It is slow. It requires a patience that the loud, fast world often mistakes for weakness. But I learned that in that quiet, there is immense strength. In a world of hype and illusion, a single, unadorned fact can be the most powerful force of all.